This is my true story. My doctor took one look at my ultrasound and begged me to divorce my wife immediately. What I discovered in that cold clinic destroyed my reality. Before that, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And please subscribe to this channel so that my stories can reach more people. My name is Arthur, and I am 72 years old. For 40 years, I thought I was the luckiest man alive. I was a military scout who survived a brutal war, and I spent my retirement in a beautiful estate with my wife, Elena. She was my rock. Every morning, she'd bring me a cup of jasmine tea, smiling as she watched me drink it. I thought we were building a legacy. I trusted her with my life, my fortune, and my fading memories. I was a soldier who finally found peace, or so I thought. One day I had a dull ache in my side. I thought it was just an old man's problem. I went to see Leo, a doctor whose father served in my unit. I sit in the exam room of the clinic, the paper covering the table crinkling under my weight. The air is cold, smelling of antiseptic. Across from me sits Leo. He is a good man, the son of Silas, who crawled through the mud of the jungle with me a lifetime ago. Leo has been my doctor for a decade, but today he won't look me in the eye. He stares at the ultrasound monitor, his fingers hovering over the frozen image of my internal organs. "Arthur, I need you to look at this," Leo whispers. He turns the screen toward me. I've seen maps of minefields that looked friendlier. My kidneys are covered in a strange, white, webbed scarring. It looks like a spider has been spinning silk across my vitals. My blood runs cold, not from fear, but from recognition. "I know that pattern, Leo," I say, my voice steady as a heartbeat. "That's Agent X, the chemical neurotoxin the general's regime used in the 1980s. Leo's face goes pale. He leans forward, his voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioner. "It's not just a ghost from your past, Arthur. This isn't old damage. The chemical levels in your blood are spiking. You're being microdosed daily. Someone is putting this in your food. Your tea, your soup, your water." I stare at the screen. For 40 years, Elena has prepared my morning tea. Every single day. "Who is she, Leo?" I ask. I don't need to say her name. We both know who feeds me. Leo swallows hard. He pulls a thin file from his desk. "I did some digging into her maiden name after the first blood test came back abnormal. Elena isn't who she says she is. Her father wasn't a clerk. He was General Vane, the man who ordered the strike on your unit." The room feels like it's tilting, but I don't move a muscle. My marriage wasn't a union. It was a containment mission. She didn't love me. She was the warden assigned to watch the evidence, me, and make sure I died slowly enough that no one would ask questions. The political dynasty she comes from needed me silenced, and she was the silencer. "Arthur, you have to get out," Leo says, grabbing my arm. "The dose is getting higher. If you stay in that house, you'll be dead or completely demented within the month. Leave Elena today. I can call the authorities." I look at his hand on my sleeve and then up at his worried face. I feel the alpha in me rise, the scout who survived the very jungle her father tried to bury me in. "No, Leo," I say, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm. "If I leave now, she wins. She keeps the money, the estate, and her father's clean reputation." "She's killing you," Leo hisses. "She's trying," I correct him. I stand up, smoothing the front of my shirt. I feel a sharp pain in my side, but I ignore it. A scout doesn't run from a trap. He maps it. The cold air of the clinic still clings to my skin as I pull my car into the long, winding driveway of the Sterling estate. For 40 years, I saw these towering oaks as a symbol of the peace I had earned. Now, they look like the bars of a very expensive cage. I park the car and sit for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turn white. I have to be perfect. If Elena sees even a flicker of the truth in my eyes, the game ends before I can move my pieces. I walk through the front door, making sure to drag my left foot slightly, a phantom symptom I've practiced to feed her ego. Elena is in the sunroom, bathed in the golden light of the late afternoon. She looks elegant, pouring tea from a silver pot into a delicate porcelain cup. "How is the doctor, dear?" she asks, her voice like honey poured over a blade. She doesn't look up, her focus entirely on the stream of amber liquid. "Just kidney stones, Elena," I say, sinking into my armchair with a forced groan. The boy is thorough, but I'm just getting old. My memory is starting to feel like a sieve. She finally looks at me, and for the first time, I see it. The parasite isn't a metaphor. It's in the way she smiles, a tight, controlled expression that doesn't reach her eyes. She sets the cup down in front of me. I'm so sorry, Arthur. It's a burden, isn't it? Losing your grip on things. She pushes the tea toward me. Drink this. It's the jasmine blend you like. It will help with the pain. I look at the steam rising from the cup. I know exactly what is in it now. Each sip is a tiny grain of sand in the gears of my life. You're too good to me, I murmur. I pick up the cup, bring it to my lips, and tilt it. I don't swallow. I let the liquid pool in my mouth, then pretend to cough into my napkin, soaking the cloth with the poison. Actually, my stomach is a bit sour. I think I'll go lie down. Her eyes narrow for a fraction of a second, a predator wondering if the prey is spooked. Of course. But before you do, Sarah called. She wants to discuss the estate planning again. You know how she worries about your legacy. She worries about the bank account, I say, letting a bit of a cranky old man slip into my tone. Elena's smile sharpens. She just wants us to be secure. We should sign those power of attorney papers tonight, while your mind is still clear. Tonight, I agree, nodding slowly. Whatever makes you feel secure, Elena. I stand up and walk toward my study, my back hunched just enough to look defeated. Once the door is closed and locked, I straighten my spine. The ailing husband disappears. I move to my bookshelf and pull back a false leather binding, revealing my old military-grade surveillance kit. I spend the next hour installing pinhole cameras in the crown molding and tapping the landline. As I work, my hands are steady. My heart is a cold stone. I am no longer a husband, and this is no longer a home. It is a theater of war, and I am the only one who knows the play has started. The click of the hidden camera snapping into place was the last sound I heard before the heavy oak door of my study creaked open. I barely had time to slide the panel shut and slump back into my chair, adopting the vacant stare of a man losing his grip on reality. It was my daughter, Sarah, trailing a scent of expensive perfume and cold ambition. "Dinner is ready, Dad," she said, not bothering to mask the irritation in her voice. "And please, try to keep your shirt clean tonight. We have people coming by later." "I'm coming, Sarah," I mumbled, pushing myself up with a deliberate heaviness in my limbs. At the dining table, the atmosphere was thick with a silence that felt like a funeral shroud. Elena sat at the head, her eyes tracking my every movement as I struggled with my napkin. Sarah sat opposite me, scrolling through her phone, her thumb moving with a predatory speed. I picked up my fork, my hand mimicking a fine, rhythmic tremor. The silver clattered against the fine china, a sound that seemed to snap Sarah's thin patience. "For God's sake, Dad, can you stop that?" she snapped, slamming her phone onto the table. "It's like eating dinner with a broken clock." "I'm sorry, sweetheart," I said, my voice thin and wavering. "My hands, they don't always listen to me lately." Sarah let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Your hands don't listen. Your brain doesn't listen. You're becoming an embarrassment. We had to decline the charity gala invite from the Johnsons because Mom is too ashamed to take you out in public. You smell like an old pharmacy, and you look like you're waiting for a bus that isn't coming." Elena didn't defend me. She simply took a slow sip of her wine, watching me over the rim of her glass. "He's a shell of a man, Sarah, a burden we have to bear with dignity." "Dignity?" Sarah scoffed. "He's a loser who got lucky in real estate after the war. He doesn't even remember where he put the deeds to the downtown properties. He's just a ghost haunting a house he doesn't deserve anymore." I looked down at my plate, hidden by the shadow of my brow. Inside, the soldier was screaming for blood, but the scout remained perfectly still. I felt the cold, tactical clarity of a man who has already won the war, but hasn't told the enemy yet. "I built those properties for your future, Sarah," I said softly, testing the waters. "And you'll sign them over to me tonight, so I can actually do something with them," she countered, leaning in. "Before you forget how to write your own name. Honestly, Dad, you're lucky Mom stays with you. Anyone else would have put you in a state home a year ago." "Is that what you want, Elena?" I asked, turning my gaze to my wife. "A state home?" Elena reached over and patted my shaking hand. Her skin felt like a reptile's. I want what's best for the family legacy, Arthur. And right now, you aren't part of that strength. You're the weakness we have to manage. I pulled my hand back slowly, tucked it under the table, and hit the save button on the digital recorder, strapped to my inner thigh. I had every word, the contempt, the greed, the admission of my weakness. I see, I said, my voice regaining a hint of its old steel, though they were too blinded by their own arrogance to notice. I'll sign whatever you put in front of me tonight. Just let me finish my soup. They went back to their phones and their wine, dismissing me as a conquered territory. They didn't see the way I looked at the security camera I'd hidden in the chandelier. I wasn't a ghost. I was the architect of their downfall. The echo of Sarah's laughter was still fresh in my mind as I retreated to my study, the weakness they mocked serving as my perfect camouflage. To them, my slow gait was a sign of decay. To me, it was the measured pace of a man checking his flank. They thought they were clearing the path for their future, but they were simply walking deeper into the kill zone I had established decades ago. I locked the heavy door and sat at my desk, the rhythmic tapping of my fingers no longer a tremor, but a code. I pulled out a secure satellite laptop, a relic of my private consulting days that Elena didn't know existed. "Miller, are you there?" I whispered into the headset. "I'm here, Arthur," my lawyer replied, his voice raspy. "I've reviewed the recordings you uploaded. It's chilling. Attempted murder, conspiracy to defraud. We have enough to bury them 10 times over." "Not yet," I said, watching the live feed from the sunroom on a split screen. Elena was currently on the landline, her face lit by a cold, sharp ambition. "I don't just want them in jail. I want them to feel the weight of the poverty they think they've escaped. How is the liquidation coming?" "It's moving fast. The Sterling holdings in the Caymans are already being redirected. The downtown deeds, I've transferred them to a blind trust for the Veterans Relief Fund. By the time the gala starts, you will legally be a man of modest means." "Good," I replied. I turned my attention to the audio feed from the sunroom. Elena's voice crackled through my headset. "Yes, Father," she was saying. "The Agent X is working perfectly. His cognitive functions are sliding. He's signing the power of attorney documents tonight. Once the assets are in our campaign account, we can move him to the facility in the mountains. He won't last another 3 months." I felt a surge of cold fire in my chest. She wasn't just my wife. She was a legacy of the very evil I had fought in the jungle. She was her father's daughter, using a chemical leash to lead me to my own grave. "Arthur?" Miller's voice brought me back. "The physical symptoms. How are you holding up?" "The toxin is buzzing in my nerves, Miller. It feels like ants under my skin," I admitted, my eyes fixed on the screen as Elena blew a kiss to the portrait of her father. "But my mind has never been sharper. A scout doesn't feel pain until the mission is over. Keep the transfers quiet. If they check the balances, I want them to see ghost numbers, inflated figures that don't actually exist." "Understood. You're playing a dangerous game, Arthur. If she increases the dose, then I'll die standing up," I interrupted. "I'm setting the perimeter now. Tomorrow I start the psychological war. I want her to start doubting her own shadows." I disconnected the call and looked at the stack of papers Elena had left for me to sign. I picked up a pen and, with a perfectly shaky hand, signed a name that wasn't mine. I signed the name of the first man in my unit who died because of her father. The perimeter was set. Now I just had to wait for them to trip the wire. The ink of my forged signature was still wet on the power of attorney papers as the clock in the hallway struck midnight. Every chime felt like a countdown. Elena had already retired to her room, likely dreaming of the political empire my blood was currently funding. I stood up, my joints popping in the silence. The tremor in my hands vanished as I gripped a small, high-intensity flashlight. It was time to find the source. I moved through the dark hallways of the estate with the silent, predatory grace of a man who had spent his youth navigating jungle canopies. I didn't need a map. I knew every creak in the floorboards. I reached the gallery, a long room filled with the spoils of our life together. At the far end hung the massive oil painting of General Vane, Elena's father. His eyes seemed to follow me, cold and judgmental. "You missed one, General," I whispered to the canvas. I reached behind the heavy gilded frame, feeling for the recessed catch I had discovered during my surveillance install. With a soft click, the painting swung outward, revealing a modern biometric wall, safe. It was a high-end model, but technology is a double-edged sword. It always leaves a back door for those who know where to look. I pulled a small electronic bypass device from my pocket, an old gift from a contact in military intelligence. Within seconds, the safe's lock whirred and the door drifted open. My breath hitched. Inside wasn't jewelry or gold. It was a pharmacy of death. There were several small, unmarked glass vials, filled with a clear, viscous liquid, Agent X. Beside them lay a leather-bound ledger. I opened the book, my flashlight illuminating the neat, elegant handwriting of my wife. It was a meticulously kept record of my destruction. March 12. Increased dosage to 0.5 milligrams in morning tea. Patient exhibiting mild confusion. April 22. Hand tremors confirmed. Assets transfer initiated. I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the poison. This wasn't just greed, it was a sport to her. She was documenting my containment like a scientist studying a lab rat. I flipped to the back of the ledger and found a list of names: politicians, judges, and doctors. It was a network of corruption that kept the vain name clean. Every payment was listed, every bribe documented. This was the map of betrayal. I pulled out my phone and began photographing every page, my hands steady as a sniper's. Suddenly the floorboard in the hall groaned. I froze, my thumb hovering over the shutter. The light from a hallway lamp spilled under the gallery door. I didn't panic. I didn't scramble. I tucked the ledger back into the safe, closed the door, and slipped behind a heavy velvet curtain just as the door handle turned. Elena entered, wearing a silk robe, her face a mask of suspicion. She walked straight to her father's portrait, touching the frame to ensure it hadn't been moved. "Is someone there?" she called out, her voice sharp. I didn't breathe. I watched her through the gap in the curtains. She stood there for a long minute, a predator sensing a shift in the wind. Finally she sighed, smoothed her hair, and left the room. I waited 10 full minutes before stepping out of the shadows. I looked at the portrait one last time. You thought you trapped the scout in a cage, Elena. But you forgot the first rule of the jungle. Never assume the prey is sleeping. I had the ledger. I had the vials. I had everything I needed to burn her world to the ground. The memory of Elena's cold fingers touching her father's portrait was still fresh in my mind when the sun rose the next morning. I had spent the remaining hours of the night replacing the data on my surveillance kit and preparing my body for the day. I walked into the kitchen, my gait heavier than usual, playing the part of the fading patriarch. "Elena," I said, my voice intentionally rasping as I sat at the breakfast nook. "I've been thinking about the anniversary. 40 years. It's a lifetime. I want to celebrate it, properly." Elena paused, her hand hovering over the kettle. She turned, a mask of gentle concern draped over her features. "You aren't well, Arthur. A big party might be too much for your heart." "No," I insisted, letting a desperate glimmer enter my eyes. "I want a gala. The grand ballroom at the plaza. I want the press, our old friends and your father's colleagues. I want the world to see what we've built before. Well, before I can't remember it anymore." A slow, predatory satisfaction spread across her face. She saw this as the perfect exit strategy, a public final appearance to solidify her standing before she tucked me away in a sanitarium. "If that's what you truly want, darling," she said, finally pouring the tea, "I'll handle everything. I'll make it a night the nation won't forget." "I'm sure you will," I replied, watching the steam. As soon as she left to start her planning, I went to work on my own. I didn't call event planners, I called ghosts. I reached out to the survivors of her father's regime, the families of the men who had been erased by Agent X. I sent out 50 VIP invitations, encrypted and untraceable. "The truth will be served at 8 p.m., the digital cards read. I then contacted Leo. We met in a quiet corner of the park, far from the estate's cameras. He handed me a small, dark vial. "This is a concentrated internal cleanser, Arthur," Leo warned, his eyes darting around. "It's a high-grade stimulant and detoxifier. It will flush your system for about 4 hours, giving you total clarity and physical strength. But the crash will be brutal. It'll feel like your bones are on fire. I only need 4 hours, I said, tucking the vial into my pocket. Arthur, why the gala? Leo asked. You have the evidence. You could go to the police now. I looked at the young doctor, seeing the same spark of justice his father once carried. Because Leo, a scout, doesn't just want to stop the enemy. He wants to dismantle the machine that built them. If I go to the police now, her father's friends will bury the files. But if I expose her in front of the cameras, the diplomats, and the victims, there is no hole deep enough for them to hide in. I stood up, my back straight for a fleeting second before I resumed my slouch. I felt the toxin buzzing in my nerves, a constant reminder of the clock ticking inside me. Elena thought she was planning a celebration of her victory. She didn't realize she was building her own gallows. The weight of Leo's detoxifying vial in my pocket was a constant reminder that the clock was no longer my friend. As the gala drew closer, I watched Elena and Sarah move through the house with a new, frantic energy. They were like vultures decorating a nest they hadn't built. I sat in my study, the door cracked just enough to hear their hushed conversations in the hallway. The catering alone is $50,000, Mom, Sarah hissed, her voice dripping with greed. Are you sure the transfer went through? If Dad's accounts are locked. Quiet, Sarah, Elena interrupted, her tone sharp as a razor. I saw him sign the papers. The bank confirmed the power of attorney. By Friday, every cent he made from those blood-soaked real estate deals will be under our control. He's too far gone to notice a few zeros moving around. I smiled to myself in the dim light. They were right about one thing. The money was moving. But it wasn't moving to them. I spent the next 3 days in a silent, scorched earth campaign. With Miller's help, I bypassed the ghost balances I had set up. I watched on my monitor as millions of dollars, wealth built on the hard work of a soldier and the survival of a scout, flowed out of our joint accounts. I didn't stop at the liquid cash. I moved the deeds of our properties into a blind trust dedicated to the families of my fallen unit. I liquidated the stock portfolios. I even sold the offshore holdings that Elena's father had used to hide his campaign contributions. By the time I was finished, the sterling fortune was a hollow shell, a beautiful balloon filled with nothing but cold air. I met Miller one last time at a nondescript diner on the edge of town. He handed me a tablet showing the final balances. It's done, Arthur. You're legally broke. On paper, you don't even own the chair you're sitting in. The money has already reached the survivors' funds in Europe and South America. And the house? I asked. The estate is technically owned by the Vain Victims Foundation now, Miller said, shaking his head. Elena is going to lose her mind when she tries to pay the gala vendors. She won't try to pay them until Monday, I said, my voice steady. And by Monday she'll be in a cell. How are the guest lists? The survivors are confirmed. They'll be in the front rows, right next to the press, Miller replied. He looked at me, his eyes full of a heavy kind of respect. You're really going through with this. You're leaving yourself with nothing. I never wanted the money, Miller. I wanted the peace, I said. I felt a sharp, stabbing pain in my gut. The Agent X was fighting for control. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead. A scout doesn't carry extra weight when he's crossing the finish line. He leaves everything on the field. I walked out of the diner and headed home to prepare for my final night as a prisoner. I had 3 days left, 3 days to play the fool while I burned the empire to the ground. Elena thought she was stripping me of my life, but I was the one stripping her of her world. The scorched earth I had left behind was invisible to the naked eye, hidden beneath the polished marble floors of the plaza's grand ballroom. As I stepped out of the black town car, the flashbulbs of the paparazzi blinded me, a silent barrage of light that felt like incoming fire. I leaned heavily on my cane, my left leg dragging with a practiced, pathetic rhythm. Beside me, Elena was a vision of triumph in a gown of midnight blue, a dress she had bought with a credit card that was now little more than a piece of decorative plastic. Smile, Arthur, she hissed under her breath, her hand clothing my arm with a grip that would have left bruises if I had any circulation left. Try to look like you know where you are. I know exactly where I am, Elena, I whispered back. The ballroom was a sea of gold and silk. Waiters in white gloves glided through the crowd of senators, generals, and industrial titans. I saw the parasites everywhere, men and women who had built their lives on the secrets Elena's father had buried. But in the front rows, seated with an eerie, quiet dignity, were the others, the survivors. They wore modest clothes and carried the scars of a war the world wanted to forget. They looked at me, and I gave them a single imperceptible nod. The mission was a go. I felt the toxin clawing at my insides, a dull roar in my ears that threatened to pull me under. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the vial Leo had given me. I stepped into the shadows of a heavy velvet curtain and downed the liquid in one swallow. It tasted like lightning and copper. Within seconds, the fog in my brain vanished. The tremor in my hand stopped instantly. My vision sharpened until I could see the individual threads in the carpet. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elena's voice rang out from the stage. She stood behind a podium embossed with the Sterling family crest. "Tonight, we celebrate 40 years of a beautiful union. But more than that, we celebrate the man who stood as a pillar of our community, even as his health begins to fail him." A wave of sympathetic murmurs rippled through the elite crowd. Sarah stood off to the side, looking at me with a smirk of pure, unadulterated contempt. She was probably already mentally spending the commission on the downtown properties I had given her. "Arthur," Elena called out, her voice dripping with fake emotion, "would you like to say a few words to our guests?" I walked toward the stage. I didn't drag my foot. I didn't lean on the cane. I walked with the measured, predatory stride of a man who had led men through hell and brought them back. The murmurs died down, replaced by a confused, heavy silence. The alpha they thought they had drugged into submission was standing before them, tall and terrifying. I reached the podium and looked Elena directly in the eye. Her smile faltered. For the first time in 40 years, she saw the scout, not the husband. "A toast," I said, my voice booming through the speakers without a hint of a rattle. "To loyalty, to the secrets we keep, and to the maps we follow to find the truth." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a small remote. I didn't look at the screen behind me. I knew what was there. 40 years ago, I was caught in a trap, I told the crowd. I thought I had found a partner. Instead, I found a warden. But the thing about being a scout, Elena, is that we always find a way out of the cage. I pressed the button. The screen behind me erupted into light, but it wasn't the montage of wedding photos and sunset strolls Elena had prepared. It was a high-resolution image of my own internal organs, the white-webbed scarring of Agent X glowing like a toxic map against the dark background. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. The elite guests frozen, champagne glasses halfway to their lips. "This is what 40 years of love looks like," I said, my voice echoing with a cold, rhythmic authority. "This is the biological signature of the Vane regime. A toxin banned by every civilized nation, yet delivered to me every morning in my jasmine tea." Elena lunged for the laptop at the side of the stage, her face twisted in a mask of feral panic. "He's delusional. The illness has taken his mind. Shut it off." "Sit down, Elena," I barked. The command hit her like a physical blow, the sheer weight of my alpha presence pinning her in place. I pressed the remote again. The speakers didn't play the soft violin music she had selected. Instead, the room was filled with the crisp, digital clarity of her own voice from my hidden surveillance. "The Agent X is working perfectly. The old fool is almost gone." The recording played on, detailing her plan to fund her father's political campaign with my liquidated assets. Sarah, standing by the stage, looked like she wanted to vanish into the floorboards. The press were no longer just watching. They were scrambling, their cameras capturing every second of the exposure. "You thought you were the warden of my life," I said, walking toward her as she backed away. "You thought that by eroding my memory, you could erase the crimes of your father. But a scout always knows the terrain. While you were planning my funeral, I was dismantling your dynasty." I flashed the ledger on the screen, the map of betrayal I had found in her safe, the names of every bribed official and every corrupt doctor, scrolled by in a blur of incriminating evidence. The survivors in the front row stood up as one. They didn't shout. They simply watched her with a silent, crushing judgment that was louder than any scream. "The money is gone, Elena," I continued, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper that the microphone still caught. I've spent the last 90 days liquidating every cent, every property, every offshore account, every drop of blood money your father ever touched. It's been donated to the survivors of his regime. You're standing in a ballroom you can't pay for, wearing a dress you don't own, and in 3 minutes, you'll be leaving in handcuffs. At that moment, the grand doors of the ballroom swung open. A phalanx of federal agents moved through the crowd, their badges glinting under the crystal chandeliers. Elena looked at the doors, then back at me, her eyes wide with the realization that the cage door had indeed been locked from the outside. "You're a ghost, Arthur," she shrieked, her composure finally shattering as an agent gripped her arm. "You're supposed to be dead." "A scout never dies in bed, Elena," I said, standing tall as the toxin began to burn through the last of Leo's stimulant. "He just finishes the mission and moves on." The chaos of the ballroom felt like a distant memory as the heavy doors of the plaza swung shut behind me. The shouting, the flashing lights, and the sight of Sarah weeping as she was led to a separate police cruiser. It was all just noise now. I walked down the stone steps, my knees screaming with every movement as the stimulant finally began to retreat, leaving behind the raw, burning truth of my condition. I didn't look back at the parasites, scrambling to distance themselves from the vein name. I simply kept walking. I reached into my pocket and felt the small, empty vial I had taken from Elena's secret safe. I dropped it into a trash bin on the corner. It made a hollow, insignificant sound. I didn't call a car. I didn't head for a first-class lounge. Instead, I walked 3 blocks to the small, quiet park where the shadows of the skyscrapers couldn't reach. It was the place where Silas and the rest of my unit used to meet once a year, to drink cheap coffee and remember the men we left behind. I found our old wooden bench, the green paint peeling under the weight of decades. I sat down slowly, letting out a breath that felt like it had been held for 40 years. The sky was beginning to turn a pale, bruised purple, the first hint of dawn bleeding over the horizon. I opened my thermos, the steam from the hot tea rising into the cold morning air. I took a cautious sip. It was clean. No metallic aftertaste, no chemical hum. Just the simple, honest bite of black tea. "The debt is paid, Silas," I whispered to the empty space beside me. I thought about my empty bank accounts and the estate I would never return to. To most, I was a man who had lost everything in a single night. But as I watched the sun begin to crest the skyline, I had never felt wealthier. I had traded a hollow fortune for a clear conscience. I had traded a gilded cage for the right to die on my own terms, with my mind sharp and my honor intact. Respect is not something you buy with a legacy of blood. It is something you earn by knowing when to stand and when to strike. I had enabled Elena's family for too long, mistaking silence for peace. But tonight, I had taught the world, and myself, that a man's dignity is the only asset that truly matters. The pain in my bones was sharp, a reminder that the Agent X had done its work, but it no longer felt like a defeat. It was just the cost of the mission. My mind was mine again. My life, however much of it remained, was no longer a containment mission. I leaned back against the bench, watching the city wake up. The world was moving on, unaware of the war that had just ended in a ballroom. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of the rising sun on my face. The scout was finally off the clock. The terrain was clear. The mission was complete.